Okay, it is 14:03. I am delighted to be able to welcome my colleague Leigh Wolf from the Centre for Teaching and Learning, but also colleagues from the University of Ottawa, Michelle and Sanjana. We are delighted here that you're here today to join the Centre for Studies in Higher Education to provide a webinar for us. Um, the webinar is entitled Generative AI Ethics and Digital Literacies in Teacher Education, and obviously a cross-institutional collaboration. This is going to be absolutely fascinating. I'm delighted again to welcome you all. I'm going to hand over to Leigh, who's going to start and introduce her colleagues. Thank you, Leigh.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We're very excited to share some research that is in progress at the moment, which is a result of a collaboration between myself at University College Dublin and my colleagues, Michelle and Sajani, who are at University of Ottawa. So I'm going to briefly turn things over to Michelle and Sajani just to give a little bit about their positionality and roles at University of Ottawa. Michelle?
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Leigh. Oh, I was frozen there for a second. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michelle Hagerman, and I am an associate professor in the Faculty of Education at the University of Ottawa. And I'm also the director of our teacher education program. And it's my distinct privilege to work with Sajani Karunawera, who will also introduce herself now.
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. So I'm Sajani Karunavira. I'm a PhD candidate from the University of Ottawa, and my work focuses specifically on the intersections between AI and accessibility. So this work has been very enriching for me, and I'm really looking forward to having this discussion today.
Fantastic, thanks. So I think I'll start out just giving a little bit about the project context and talking about the project more widely. So when you get a chance, Michelle, I'll have you switch the slide. Thank you. So as we know, generative AI it's become a bit cliche now to say how much it's transforming education and educational experiences, but it is. And as educators and educators of educators, it's really imperative to ethically prepare pre-service teachers in particular with AI literacies and pedagogies. And so this project is a collaboration between our two institutions. And as Michelle mentioned, we're focused specifically here on pre-service teachers. And through the presentation today, you'll learn a little bit about the work that we have done with them and the data that we're looking at. And the project is we were starting to put together a concept for this visiting researcher grant project that has supported this work. We were informed by an article that came out a few years ago from Tim Fawns, where he describes something called entangled pedagogy. And we are looking at all of our data, and we've set up sort of the whole premise of this work around that idea. And I'll talk about entangled pedagogy. Now you've read my mind, Michelle. And so if you look at this graphic here, this is from the article, and Fawns talks about this sort of illusionary binary that sort of happens, that either tech drives pedagogy or pedagogy drives tech, and things kind of fall into place that well. But in actuality, there's a mutual shaping of purpose, context, values, methods, and technology. It's really this tangled mess. It's not easy to look at and deconstruct, but if you take that sort of orientation that things are entangled to begin with, it allows you to have rich conversations around technologies broadly, but in this case, generative AI specifically. And it gives us a chance to look at the phenomenon in practice, where we're not just looking at teacher educators using something, say, like ChatGPT. It's a complex web of all the technologies that they're using, nested in the fact that they are at University of Ottawa, they're in Ontario, Canada, and there's all these different forces or entanglements that can happen when we are confronted with technology. And so the big picture view of this project is there's a few components. The first is a literature review that Sajani will be talking about in a few minutes, looking at some frameworks for critical AI literacies and how those are either being developed or already being implemented and how those can inform our work. And as part of a module or a course at University of Ottawa, this past spring semester, pre-service teacher candidates experienced an intervention, if you will, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes as well, specifically around generative AI and thinking of it in a critical way. And then the third and final component are interviews with leaders from local school boards in Ottawa and talking about their sort of conceptions and use and needs of teachers, pre-service teachers in their communities, because as we've mentioned, we want to try to capture and honor the complexities of the use of generative AI. It really, we all can say that we close our classroom door and things happen in that space, but that's, we know, a bit of a falsehood that there are several forces that come into play when we're talking about AI broadly. So if you want to take a look at the project timeline, just to give you an idea of where we are in the process. Last September, we started planning and imagining what this project might look like. And Michelle and Sajani did a brief pilot of the intervention in September of last year, just to get an idea of whether or not the lesson plan that we created would work and to get some initial ideas. No data was collected at that time. It was just sort of a proof of concept. And then we received approval for ethics to go forward with the project in full. And between January and February this year, we revised our intervention and protocol and planned for launch. And then I was able to visit Ottawa in February for about 2 weeks, where we delivered the lesson and collected data, and also tangentially talked to some school board leaders as well, and leaders in the college and school around generative AI conversations. And then after the data collection, we started to do a little bit of data analysis and thinking about our theoretical and conceptual frameworks that we wanted to really hone in on to look at the data. And we are now in the throes of that data analysis. So you'll see some very early insights from that. And then we plan to write all that up for publication as the grant comes to an end in August through October. And so I think I'll turn things over to you now, Sajani, to talk a little bit about some emerging insights from the literature review.
So from the literature, we see that AI literacy is a globally emerging research topic in education, but it seems to be almost absent in the context of teacher education. There seems to be a dominant focus on pre and in-service teacher perceptions on the adoption of AI in their teaching practices, but there's still limited research on the pedagogical and practical knowledge in pre-service teachers or within teacher education programs that has not been widely studied. So there seems to be a need for research that explores the ethical use of AI and how to support pre-service teachers in the development of these critical and ethical dispositions. So the pilot that we conducted in the fall 2024, the context was that we went into a classroom, integrating technology in classroom course for teacher candidates. And the class focused, the session was focused on generative AI systems in K-12 education. So the class had 41 students in total. 24 were teachers that were practicing to be in between grades 7 to 12, 5 primary grade K-6 teachers, and 12 grades 4 to 10 teachers, pre-service teachers. So the instruction and the learning activities aim to talk about some and provide them with some background knowledge, and also see where they were at with their background knowledge, and prepare students with information about AI literacies and AI pedagogies and what that might look like in a classroom setting, and activate awareness of tech pedagogy entanglements through a design activity that I will talk about next. So after the instructional portion of the lesson, students were asked to use this scale of ethical AI developed by Perkin et al. To co-design an assessment for students using one level of the scale as their guide and reflect on their decision. So in this scale, we see that it goes from no AI to full AI. So students were asked to really look at this scale and see where their assessment and the design of their assessment might fall within this scale, and also what they would like to ask their students to do in relation to the scale as well. Yep. So part one, there were two parts to this. So the first part was that they co-designed and co-planned an assessment that aligns with one level of that framework and also the Ontario curriculum. And part two was a reflection on new learning that happened during this assessment activity, during the creation and design of this assessment, and also whether the assessment framework extended their own thinking, and to provide examples of that. What tensions have surfaced for you during your work and during your thinking about AI in assessment, and whether they will use AI in their work as a teacher, and kind of reflecting on that.
So we learned a lot from the pilot, and these learnings informed what became the intervention ultimately. The first thing we learned that we wanted to share with you today is that pre-service teachers' background knowledge was quite varied. Some of them knew nothing about generative AI at all, whereas others had already tested it out for various teaching-related tasks during their practicum experiences. The prompts that we used to surface their background knowledge, we felt could have been more structured to ensure that key insights were prioritized. We also, put students together in groups. It meant that students of different abilities and knowledges worked together, but those with more knowledge, we really observed, tended to be more active in the designs and discussions, and those who felt they had less background knowledge kind of sat back and, were asking a lot of questions about how to even begin. We also recognize that we may have overestimated their pedagogical content knowledge and their technological pedagogical content knowledge. Those who didn't really understand the affordances of generative AI in this pilot really struggled to imagine how to design for its use in a lesson at all. So Sajani and I were there. We found ourselves really trying to needing actually to kind of guide, even provide like specific ideas that would help these pre-service teacher candidates to get started. And we felt that creating a lesson from scratch using the scale as a guide may have actually been too challenging and time consuming for students with little prior experience with AI systems, who are also at the same time learning to teach in various disciplines, right? So we really did see how the entanglements in some ways limited their capacity to engage with a design activity. That said, at the end of the course, the ethical AI framework that we introduced as part of this pilot was identified as a key takeaway for many of the students. So they did continue to think about it, but in the lesson itself, maybe the design of the lesson was a bit too challenging for some. So we changed some things. In terms of background knowledge, we prompted the teacher candidates to create mind maps on whiteboards. And the prompt that we provided included questions meant to surface specific knowledge, such as names of tools, ways to use generative AI, questions on their minds, observations about the functioning of generative AI, insights about prompt engineering. So we were much more prescriptive in some ways before students started creating their mind maps. In terms of instruction, the teacher candidates were provided a lesson in the intervention focused on neural networks and large language models to support their understanding of the technology And we introduced the notions of critical ethical use of generative AI systems within that lesson. We provided them with key questions for them during that, direct instruction time to kind of begin to help frame their thinking about generative AI and how it can be used, how it has been used. In terms of their PCK and that cognitive load issue, instead of creating a lesson, our teacher candidates in the actual intervention redesigned lessons that we actually created with AI that focus specifically on specific expectations from the entire curriculum. So we kind of provided them with the lesson, and instead of having to create it from scratch, our teacher candidates thought about the design and they modified it, right? And so we just kind of stepped up the level of what we provided, and then they were able to engage in a design activity. We also paired our teacher candidates with colleagues who were working at the same division and with similar disciplinary expertise, which meant they could really focus in on what they knew. In terms of discussion, we really did provide more intentional kind of questioning to guide discussions. And the reflection was much more direct. So we asked, do you plan to use generative AI for any purpose or any reason in your future teaching practice? What uses of generative AI seem in scope for you or okay for you? And what, in your view, are essential aspects of AI literacy for your future students to learn about and practice? So we did kind of shift those reflection questions to be better aligned, I think, with the design process sort of overall. So the intervention itself ran in February 2025, as Leigh said, when she was visiting. Students attended their regular class, which did, of course, have a day focused specifically on generative AI systems in K-12 education. All students had the opportunity to first create a mind map, and this was an individual activity, using those prompts that I just described about generative AI systems. Secondly, they had the opportunity to redesign a pre-made lesson based on specific expectations, as I said, from the entire curriculum. First, in a way that no generative AI could be used to meet the learning expectations. And then they engaged in a second round of design where they were using that ethical framework and thinking about how they would redesign the assessment using generative AI in an ethical way that aligned with one of those levels in the Perkins et al. Model. During the redesign activity, they worked with a partner. They audio recorded their conversation using an iPad. The recording of the conversation was uploaded as a reference that they could use in preparation of the written reflection. And at the end of the semester, once grades were finalized, students who consented to participate shared their written reflection on generative AI with us.
So the data that we received, received 43 mind maps, which were consented to be shared as part of the research, 12 for design task 1, and 12 for design task 2, and 27 written reflections. So these are two examples, the two of the 43 mind maps that students consented to share and did share with the research team. So our analyses are ongoing, but preliminary insights can be seen in these two examples. So in the first example, we see the naming of specific tools. In both cases, we see ChatGPT, Magic Schools, AI listed. One student names Meta AI and the other names Gemini. So there's an awareness of some of the major platforms, plus both of these two candidates have also likely interacted with a platform that has been designed specifically for use in schools by teachers and students. So there was some evidence here that teacher candidates have been exposed to this tool during their practica. In both cases, we see a lot of wandering in relation to their emergent identities as educators as well. So for student B, questions about plagiarism, cheating, and ethical use are up top. And in for student A, we see wanderings about the accuracy of results, words like misleading and how to use it properly might indicate active questioning of what might involve or even concerns or worries that this candidate has about generative AI in relation to her work as a teacher. We also see both candidates naming what AI can do effectively. They provide a range of tasks: paragraph generator, summarizing, synthesizing, clarify, generating lesson plans, answering questions, creating rubrics, and so on. So there's some acknowledgement of the utility within these particular types of tasks by both of these candidates. And finally, in for student B, we also see this candidate wondering about the economic implications of generative AI and whether it will take over jobs. So this raises some questions for us about how pre-service teachers are thinking about the economic and human implications of AI as well. So whether their concerns are more about their own jobs or the jobs of their students in the future, or the impacts on the communities where they will go to serve, or maybe even all of it. So we see some examples of that in these two mind maps. So in design task 1, we use student B's example here, where okay, so they in design task 1, they were asked to summarize, annotate provided the lesson plan that we provided, so that students will not be, there will be no evidence of students using AI in this lesson plan. So we can see here that they have annotated throughout. And the annotations would be like, to summarize, we revise the interactive portion of the lesson so that no tablets, laptops, and brainstorming is prior knowledge. So they wanted to receive copies of articles for research instead of researching online. And for the hands-on portion of the lesson, they use chart paper instead, and they use digital format as long as it matches information from before. So they provide examples of like, even in the second screenshot, we see an annotation there. For each group will research their assigned topic using computers or tablets. They have said, do not use computers or tablets. Discuss what they know about their assigned topic based on prior knowledge. And after brainstorming what they already know, provide each group with physical copies of articles, information, and resources on their topic. So in this one, they had to really grapple with the idea of how can we know that students are not using AI, and how can we have physical evidence that students are generating these ideas by themselves. For design task 2, again by student B, this assessment together, they were asked to think about how they could redesign the assessment and evaluation of student learning so that it includes generative AI, and what level of from the scale they would that they would include in this redesign. So this student B, selected level 4 because the assessment provides discussion on the AI generated response. And how does the integration of Gen AI shift your assessment / evaluation practices? They have mentioned that it makes things trickier as we aren't sure which ideas are their original ones. So when we connect back to their mind map, we also saw that those problems of misleading might be cheating, ethical problems. So even in these questions and the redesign activities, they're still grappling with the same ideas of how do we know that the students are using their original ideas and they're not just plagiarizing or cheating. Please, in the last part there, we asked them to reflect. Just like in the pilot, we asked them to reflect on whether they plan to use AI in their teaching, and why not, and what uses of Gen AI seem in scope and okay for you as a teacher, what seems out of scope and beyond what feels appropriate for them, and what in their view are essential aspects of AI literacy for their future students to learn and practice. We changed so in the pilot, you might have noticed that we had a reflection question on the AI, the framework, the assessment, the scale, and whether it extended their thinking, but we found that it might be a little bit too narrow. And in the actual intervention, the last question was changed to include essential aspects of AI literacy, so they're thinking a little bit more broadly, rather than they can refer to the AI scale in their reflection as well. However, we wanted to make it a little bit broad so that they can expand on their ideas of AI literacy for their future students.
Thank you so much, Sajni. Great overview of, just some of the pieces of data that we're working now to analyze. So as Leigh introduced, we're leveraging this concept of entangled pedagogy as a theoretical framework for our analysis and for understanding these data. We also have looked to the UNESCO AI competency framework for teachers, and the link is there in the slide deck, and we'll share the slides with you all in at the end here. Because we felt as though it would provide us initially with a conceptual framework for knowing kind of where to look, as an a priori sort of framing that will help us understand potentially dimensions of entanglement within these data. So a couple of concepts here that are essential for us as we enter into this phase of analysis. First, that the unit of analysis for entangled evaluation is combinations rather than components. And for me, that's a really compelling idea. I think as a teacher, as an educator who's worked in this area of tech integration for a really long time, reducing sort of dimensions of teaching or learning with technology down to these individual components has never really sat well with me. And so I feel that Fons has really beautifully articulated, right, those dimensions of entanglement, and that we can orient our analysis toward combination, toward complexity, versus trying, as we often do, right, to kind of break things into individual components. That said, within these, pieces of evidence that we're looking at, we are also kind of holding consideration for evidence of these aspects outlined by UNESCO. So do we see evidence of a human-centered mindset? Do we see evidence of our teacher candidates thinking about the ethics of AI? Do we see them thinking a little bit about AI foundations and the applications that are leveraged in K-12 teaching environments? Do we see them thinking about their pedagogies with AI, including their assessment, which is a part of pedagogy, of course. And the fifth one, which may not be quite as relevant in our data set, but UNESCO includes it, is AI for professional development. So that's another aspect. And again, this is sort of an a priori framework, and we will, kind of see where this leads us as we engage in the analysis. So I thought I would just sort of take you through one, mind map to see where we're thinking about the entanglements informed by UNESCO. This is, student B. You saw her mind map earlier, and Sajni also, walked you through some of that design work that she and her partner were doing. And so within this mind map, I'm starting to see, using that entangled sort of lens, connections, right? So a human-centered mindset, right? This question around taking over jobs, economic implications. We see dimensions of ethics in her thinking. And I'll just remind you, of course, that this was unprovoked. This was what the student came into the lesson holding in her mind, and what she was able to put out actually on the wall, like actually literally on the wall where I'm sitting here, behind me on the glass wall, before we even got into the lesson, or before we even got into that dialogic exercise of designing. So she's thinking about ethics, cheating, plagiarism, ethical use. She's thinking about AI Foundation. She's naming tools, right? She's named 3 tools specifically at the center of her mind map: ChatGPT, Gemini, Magic School. She's thinking about what these tools can do, synthesizing, summarizing, the efficiencies, right, that AI can afford us as pros, And she's thinking about her pedagogy and her assessment. She's thinking about lesson plans. She's thinking about report card comments. She's thinking about rubrics and how AI can help her to design them. So together, we see within this single sort of map of her understanding, right, these integrated considerations. And she's got the arrows kind of going everywhere. But at the center, we literally see her circling it, you know, like in the cloud, and all of it is kind of emerging from that center. So there is very much an entanglement there. Of course, we have a lot of data to go through, and we're just sort of at the very start of this process of understanding what it is that these data will surface for us in terms of our understandings. So our next steps are to complete our analyses through rounds of collaboration, working with Leigh in Dublin, Sajani and I here in Ottawa. You know, we have a plan through the summer to work through these data and to really construct understandings by pushing ourselves to orient toward the complexities, the entanglements, you know, to hold one another kind of accountable in our thinking. And that's what collaborative, you know, co-constructed kind of analyses looks like. And I'm looking forward to that. And then, of course, we have plans to prepare a manuscript and to, of course, finish out the reporting to the grant here at the University of Ottawa that has enabled this study to come to fruition. So that is all we have to share with you in terms of our formal presentation. Here are some references for you. And again, we'll share in the chat the link to the slide deck.
Thank you so much, guys.
Sharing.
Thank you. So that was absolutely excellent. There's so much in there, and I have lots of questions for you.